All right. Hey, welcome. Thanks for coming. So this is a session on the command line, option tips and tricks. I'm going to show you a little bit about WSL, command, and the terminal, and a couple other cool things. The main question that you guys want to know, just in case you want to skip the session, you get these at the Microsoft Store, these shirts. So yeah. Anyway, I'm Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I got a ton of stuff to go through, so I shall just get going. All right, so we're going to talk today about command line. I'm going to show you some new tricks for it. Terminal, Cloud Shell, WSL, and also VS Code. So for those of you who may not know, so Cloud Shell is actually shell.azure.com. It's a fully implemented Bash-compatible command line as well, and then the WSL is the one that runs on local machines. All right, so let's check this out for the beginning. This is an old trick, but it's something that's good to know. And don't worry, you don't need to see this at the back. This is the File Explorer, and if I want to open a command prompt from here in the console, I can just type CMD. Did you guys know that? And it actually opens a command prompt, which is kind of cool. So well, let's say there's something in here. It opens a command prompt at the spot that I'm at in File Explorer. And if you want to open VS Code from here, maybe do some editing of something, I've got a few batch files here. Whoops. So a couple batch files. I can just do code. And it'll actually open a version of VS Code for me right here with all my batch files ready to go. So that's kind of handy, kind of cool. Something you may not know as well, you can do the same exact thing with PowerShell. There you go. And these days, you can also do it with, whoops, doesn't matter, WSL. So WSL will actually bring up the Windows Subsystem for Linux as well. So that's kind of cool, something handy. If you take anything away from the session, that's probably a good one. That's a huge time saver for me when I found out you could do that. You can also do things like you can just right-click here and say copy address as text and then paste it in, do CD and all that. But this is much easier. It opens in wherever you are in File Explorer, so that's handy. So, OK. The last thing I showed you was WSL. So let's talk a little bit about that. So Windows Subsystem for Linux. When the actual command prompt, the console behind the scenes is called Windows Subsystem. That's why they didn't call it, well, they should have just called it Linux for Windows. But anyway, they called it Windows Subsystem for Linux because of that. Because Windows Subsystem is actually the command prompt for DOS, the old one. Anyway, it's built from the latest stable branch of Linux. You can get on the Microsoft, you can go to GitHub or you can go to the Microsoft Store and download it. It's specially tuned for Windows. It's the same one that you find at kernel.org, which is core Linux. It's a version of Ubuntu, and it's ready to rock and roll basically from the Microsoft Store. I've got 18 and 16 loaded on my machine because I do a lot of things with Linux, and everything works with 16 and some things work with 18. But that's a good tip as well. You can put multiple versions of WSL on your machine. I'm going to show you a little bit how to access those using the command line and also VS Code in a couple minutes. So the Windows console, let's talk about that a little bit. It's 30 years old, more than 30 years old. It's been battle tested. It's fast, small, and efficient. There's a ton of features that have been added. And it's been overhauled several times. But it's the only, apparently, the only there's no dependencies on it. It's an actual Win32 application with no dependencies. However, there are a ton of dependencies on top of the console and on top of the DOS prompts that are built into Windows and that third-party applications use. So we have to be very careful when we're editing and changing anything to do with the console and the command window that you all know and love. However, we have now, I'm sure you're aware, built Terminal. And what Terminal is a way to basically take applications any kind of command line application. In this case, we handle by default the command prompt, PowerShell, Cloud Shell, and WSL. And you can actually add your own applications, command line applications. You have something that works in your native language or different character sets and things like that. You can actually add them to this. It's extensible. But basically, it's something that runs on top of the console, on top of command prompt, on top of WSL, and on top of the PowerShell, things like that. You can have connectivity to local or remote shells, and I'll show you the actual Azure Cloud Shell in a couple minutes. And there's some beautiful things you can do with themes and text to make sure that you've got everything just the way you like it, and you can tell when you're in a certain environment. So let's check that out real quick, too. Where's my terminal? Here we go. There it is. So here's my terminal. This is my Microsoft terminal. It just has PowerShell here. I can customize it. If I go into Settings, I've actually got something already set up here. So Settings, if I go into the Settings, it opens it up in VS Code. I'm just going to make this a little smaller so that it's somewhat readable. I know I have to strike a balance between making sure you guys can see it and making sure there's enough on the screen to make sense. So in this case, what we've got is each one of these tabs here is a different configuration. And for me, I've got PowerShell, I've got Command Window, and then I've got Ubuntu 16.04 and Ubuntu 18.04 and the Azure Cloud Shell all built in. So when I installed Microsoft Terminal, it found all those things for me automatically. So those were the base. And then what I did is I customized a whole bunch of them here with different options. And I'm going to show you some of those in a sec. But the main thing you can do here that everyone wants to know about, of course, is, Brian, we have to be able to do animated GIFs, right? So you can do an animated GIF in the background there. And by the way, if it's broken, which I just did there, it just disappears again. It doesn't break anything, actually. So you get these warnings if you screw up the JSON. This is a file called profile.json. It's on your local machine. And the nice thing about that is you can take these settings and copy them somewhere else. So if you go out to the GitHub that's related with this session, you can find my profiles JSON that I'm using today. It won't exactly work for you because some of the things I have installed, like Ubuntu and all that, are not exactly the same, but you'll see how I configure everything. All right, so yeah, you can do the animated GIFs. Here's the command prompt, just a basic boring command prompt I did. And here's a command prompt for Ignite. What I did is I made the font a little bigger. I defaulted to my APPS11 default directory that I'm using, and I add a little animated GIF there. So I know where I am when I'm working with these things. And then what else have I got? So I've got, let's see, Ubuntu 16.04 for Ignite, same thing. So that opens up the Windows Subsystem for Linux, and everything is there, ready to go. So how to actually configure all this stuff? Inside the profiles.json file, there's a bunch of commands for keystrokes that you can use. And you can customize those as well to do whatever you like to do, whatever you're comfortable with. And then there's these profiles. And each profile has a color scheme, which is basically mapped to a theme. And then there's a unique ID for each one as well. There's an icon. You can change the icon. You can change that background image if you want. There's opacity. There's fonts and all kinds of things. And by the way, later on today in the hub, in the live theater, Christina Warren and myself are going to check out each other's tricked out command lines. She's got some cool stuff. She's really into fonts, so she's got all kinds of font options you might want to check out. But for me, I just did the basic stuff. And then you can do the starting directory. In this case, the starting directory for example, for my for this one, which was the command prompt for Ignite. All I do is I say wherever I am now, and then documents, advocacy events, Ignite the tour, APPS11. So it just opens up in this place. OK, so the other one that's fun, what else can you do with this? I've got a fireplace, of course. It's getting cold, so, you know, winter's coming. Thanksgiving, the holidays, whatever. So how did I do that? With the fireplace one, if I just do, okay, so this is the actual command that you use. Because you're just calling things from the command prompt when you actually fire this up. When you're looking at this in the terminal, it's not technically running in the terminal, that's just the way you display things. But it has added some things, like I can make this font smaller, I can make this flame smaller until it's really tiny. But, you know, and that works for regular fonts too. But the nice thing about that is you can't do that in the main command prompt. You have to do the right-click, Windows properties, all that stuff. But this, you can just do it like that because we're sitting on top of the command prompt. So there's some things you can control from here and some that are actually controlled from the back end. So when I look at this fireplace, what I've got is WSL EXE, and then I have got a profile for Ubuntu 16.04 because I've got both on my machine. And then AA Fire is a Linux package you can get. You do apt-get install AA Fire, and it just downloads this little silly fire. There's a whole bunch of them out there. SL for Steam Locomotive, the Steam Locomotive goes across the screen, a whole bunch of them, but I like the Fire. And then I actually changed the theme. So if I do this, for example, I created my own custom theme. Whoops, don't want to break it in front of everyone. There we go. So it just does, that's the default, right? But I wanted to have some colors in there, so I called it Fireplace. And then it actually sets up some colors. So how the colors work is if I go down here, there's an actual theme. I borrowed the Campbell theme. There's a whole bunch of themes that come with it. You can see them here. And these are all colors and font sizes and things like that. In this one, all I did was I changed the foreground and the bright white and colors, and it changed everything. So that's just like a little example, but it gives you an idea. You can change the fonts, you can change the characters, and you can customize these things. All right, so that's a little bit about the terminal. So you get the idea, though. It's running on top of, in this case, WSL, but it's actually controlling all of the display options for WSL. So the other thing I want to talk to you about is the Azure CLI. So how many people are familiar with the Azure CLI? How many people use it? Okay, so half of you or so, okay. It's written in Python, it's extensible, it's on GitHub, and basically it's a way of controlling your cloud applications. So if I go in here, I think I had one, yeah, I have one already created. So the Azure CLI is actually preloaded in my Cloud Shell, if I can type. Doesn't like it? Okay. That's the nice thing. I can just make a new one. Plus. Oh, maybe not. Hey, seems to be stuck. Okay. Hold on. No, it's not working. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Cloud Shell. There we are. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing good. Okay, so this is the Cloud Shell. I can type AZ, and the Azure CLI is built in. The advantage of this, so what happens when I create the Cloud Shell, and by the way, you can go into any browser, shell.azure.com, here it is over here. So same thing, shell.azure.com. Also, if you have the Azure app on your phone, Android or iPhone, there is a way to invoke this through there, through the Cloud Shell. I was on vacation a while ago. First time ever, I didn't take my laptop. I had a Kubernetes cluster that was out of security compliance, and I had to shut it down. I was able to do it on my iPhone using the Azure CLI through Cloud Shell. So that's kind of a cool thing. So what happens when I invoke this Cloud Shell? You go to shell.azure.com or open it in the terminal. It goes out to Azure. It opens up a container in something called Azure Container Instances, ACI, and it installs a pre-made Docker image into here. And that Docker image has Azure CLI, which controls all of Azure. It has Terraform. So we've got Terraform, we've got Cloud Foundry, we've got all kinds of things. In fact, kube control, Docker, all kinds of commands are actually pre-made in here. So the cool thing about this is you can actually go out here, oh, and you can do this. From here, you can go to code. You guys have heard about Visual Studio Online this week. This has been around for a little longer. It's much more simple. But from shell.azure.com, I can open this up and I can manipulate code. I can play around with things. I can do a git clone, and it stores it over here on the left and allows me to do things with that. And of course, I can do things with the command line too. So that's just a little bit about Cloud Shell and the Azure CLI. It's written in Python. It's on GitHub. We accept PRs, and you can extend it as well. Last but not least, I want to tell you about VS Code Remote. So you guys have seen VS Code. This is about the command prompt. So let me show you a little bit about that. I'm going to actually connect to a remote virtual machine that I've already created. And then I'm going to show you a little bit about things. Oh, so let me go through the options here. There's 3 different options: remote WSL, remote SSH, and remote containers. And to be honest, when I first saw remote WSL, I was like, what is that for? Because it runs on your local machine. Why do you have to go remote into your local machine? Well, the answer is, basically, it acts as a conduit into your WSL installation, which is different from anything else you have on your machine. It's an isolated environment. Although you can share things like environment variables and other things that you can share, binaries, but it's a separate environment. So for example, you could have Node and Docker installed in your WSL instance, but not on your Windows machine. See what I mean? If you want to install Docker on both the Windows machine and WSL, you have to install them separately. So that's why you do the remote WSL. So you can go into your, from Visual Studio Code, you can go into your WSL environment, manipulate files, run code, run shell scripts. It's still on your local machine, but it's in a different environment. Remote SSH connects to a host. So I'm actually going to connect to a VM, and then I'll show you the differences here. There we go. I've got SSH there, so it just connects in. Then I'm going to open a folder. Yay, okay. All right. So this is all about the command line, though, so let me show you what just happened. So on a normal, if I hit Control backtick on a normal VS Code instance, there's different options here I have for setting up my default environment down here. And right now, it's in WSL. So when I hit Control backtick, it opens up WSL in the command prompt. And we've got this here. This is some code that I'm working on. This is the profiles JSON file that I showed you earlier. I can do Control-Shift-P, and I can change the default shell. So locally, I can do command prompt, PowerShell, WSL, or git bash. I can also do Control-Shift-P. I can open bash in Cloud Shell. So what that'll do is each time I open this, it'll actually, oh, maybe I didn't change it. Anyway, it'll open the Cloud Shell when I do that. So Control backtick will open the Cloud Shell here. So this up here will be on my local machine, and this down here will be in Azure, which is kind of cool. Now, when you're remote, it's a little bit different. Here I am, I'm remote, I'm in my virtual machine right now. This is a YAML file. I can edit this file, but this is actually editing on the VM out there. So I don't need to invoke Vi or Vim or any of those things that you can't remember how to get out of. You can just start this up. I can make a change here, and I can save it, just Control S, and you see it saved it up there. And that's saved on my virtual machine. There's different options here when you say select default shell. In the other one, if you remember, it was command prompt and the other stuff. Here we've got shell, bash, rbash, dash, tmux, and screen. So I can actually set up and I can run tmux. So the next time I open something here, it's actually going to open up in a tmux terminal. So I can run something here. And then when I exit out of here, because it's tmux, it'll actually keep running as we go. All right. So that showed you a little bit of the differences between the local VS Code and the code when you're actually dialed into a VM in this case. Last but not least, you can actually connect to containers as well, but we don't have time for that today, unfortunately. Okay, I showed that. So get involved. Install and run Windows Terminal, WSL, CLI. They're all on GitHub. Here's WSL. It's under Microsoft. I always get this thing. Here's MS-DOS. How many people here knew that MS-DOS has been open sourced? Just a couple, yeah. Not a lot of people do. I love to do that trick question. Do you think we should open source MS-DOS? And people are like, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, okay, we did it about a year ago. So anyway, it's out there. And then Terminal is open source, and the Azure CLI open source as well. On GitHub, we accept PRs. You can extend things. We had a client in Israel. They're extending the terminal to do some things with the character sets that they use for terminal, for example, and the CLI. So you can do that automatically. You don't have to contribute back, but you can if you like. We certainly welcome PRs, and we welcome additions as well. So get involved there, install and run the Windows Terminal, WSL, CLI. There's some session code on GitHub. That's the photo slide if anybody wants it. But it's APPS APPS11 repo. And my JSON file for terminal and stuff is out there as well, and some command stuff. Upcoming sessions, I mentioned before. So in the hub live stage at 12:55 today, Christina and Warren and I are going to check out each other's terminals. I've got a few other things that I haven't shown here. I'm going to focus on terminals over there. So if you come over there, you won't get the same thing. And then there's a couple of other sessions. Unfortunately, the session on terminal was yesterday, but there are some other sessions on the CLI from some colleagues that have done a great job in setting those up. So a couple of theater sessions and a actual full session as well on November 8th. So. Thanks for coming. Brian Benz, B Benz, follow me on Twitter, and please welcome your feedback as well. So thank you very much.